My son started crying every time my wife's phone rang. I thought it was weird, until he whispered, "Mom gets mean when her boyfriend comes over." I checked the security camera that night and couldn't stop shaking. But before I begin, I want to make an important announcement about our channel. For the past 5 months, our channel has not been monetized, which means I'm not earning any money from YouTube ads. There are currently no ads running on our videos. Because of this, I also have to work another job, which makes it difficult for me to upload videos daily. If you enjoy our content and want to support the channel, please consider donating just $1. $1 may seem small, but if everyone supports together, it can make a huge difference and help keep this channel active. Your support will help me spend more time creating stories and uploading videos consistently instead of working another job. Of course, you can donate any amount you would like, and every donation truly helps and means a lot to me. To support the channel, please click the donation link in the video description or pinned comment. You can also scan the QR code shown on the screen to donate quickly and easily. Thank you so much for supporting. Now, let's dive into today's story. The town of Millhaven, Michigan sat at the edge of a lake that never truly warmed. Even in late August, the water stayed cold enough to make children gasp and pull back from the shore. By November, the cold settled over everything like a lid pressed down tight. The trees went bare early. The streets went quiet early. People moved faster out here, ducking from cars to houses, turning up the heat and drawing curtains against the dark that arrived before dinner and stayed until long after breakfast. It was the kind of town where people stayed because they had to. Factory work, shipping contracts, construction jobs that barely paid enough to keep a family fed through winter. Nobody talked much about ambitions, because ambitions required money, and money was what everyone was always a little short of. Trent Holloway had grown up 20 miles east of Millhaven, in a worse town with worse prospects. His father died of a heart attack when Trent was 14, leaving behind a mother who worked 2 jobs and still cried quietly over unpaid bills at the kitchen table after she thought the kids were asleep. Trent spent his teenage years riding buses to part-time shifts at a hardware store and a car wash, handing over most of what he made and learning to stretch almost nothing into just enough. By the time he was old enough to get a full-time position, he already understood things most men his age would not figure out until their 30s. Hard work was not optional. Sacrifice was not a virtue you chose. It was simply the shape that survival took. He was 39 now, broad through the shoulders, quiet with his hands. He worked 12-hour shifts at a heavy equipment repair yard near the Detroit shipping docks, maintaining cranes and compactors and loading machinery that would grind most men down inside a month. It was loud, brutal, exhausting work, and Trent did it without complaint because he had never once found that complaint fixed anything. What he worked for was simple: a house his son could grow up in, a family that felt like something real, stability, the kind of childhood Trent himself had never had. He had believed for several years that he was building exactly that. His wife, Vanessa, stayed home with her 7-year-old son, Carter. That had been the arrangement made before Carter was born. Vanessa would manage the house and be there when Carter got home from school each afternoon. Trent trusted her with that. He worked longer shifts when the yard needed him, picked up overtime through the cold months, and never once questioned where the money went because he believed he was working toward something whole. He should have questioned it sooner, but he did not know that yet. What he knew in the autumn of that year was that something was wrong inside his house. He could not name it first. It arrived slowly, the way cold seeps under a door. A feeling he pushed aside at the end of a long shift because he was tired and because he wanted to believe what he had built was still standing. A detail he rationalized away because the alternative took more energy than he had left at the end of a 12-hour day. Then the phone call started, and Carter's behavior gave everything away. The first time Trent really noticed was a Tuesday evening in late October. He had come home to find dinner already on the table. Pork roast, potatoes, green beans. The kind of meal Vanessa made when she was trying to seem like everything was fine. Carter sat in his usual chair, quiet, picking at his food the way children do when something is sitting on top of them that they have not been allowed to put down. Trent had assumed the boy was tired. A rough day at school. Kids went through those. Then Vanessa's phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. Carter went completely still. Not the ordinary stillness of a child pausing mid-bite. Something else. Something that tightened his small shoulders and fixed his eyes on the countertop, as if looking at the phone directly might make things worse. His hands came off his fork without him seeming to notice they had moved. Vanessa stood from the table before the second buzz had finished. She grabbed the phone in one clean motion and walked out of the kitchen without a word. No explanation. No excuse me. Just gone. Carter watched the doorway she had disappeared through. His hands sat flat on the table now, fork forgotten beside his plate, his food untouched. His lips pressed together in a thin line that was too tight for a 7-year-old's face. Trent watched his son. "Hey," he said quietly. "You okay?" Carter looked at him. Something moved across the boy's face. Not surprise and not relief, but something more careful than either. Like he was measuring the distance between what he wanted to say and what was safe to say. "Yeah," Carter said, but he did not pick his fork back up. He sat with his shoulders pulled inward, listening. Through the wall behind them came the low murmur of Vanessa's voice, too soft to make out words, pitched differently than the way she normally spoke. Lighter somehow, almost younger. Carter kept watching the wall. Trent did not say anything else. He ate his food and watched, and stored the feeling away in the back of his mind where he kept things he was not yet ready to examine. He had learned a long time ago that the most useful thing a man could do with something he did not fully understand, yet was to keep watching it. That night, after Carter was in bed and Vanessa was in the shower, Trent sat at the kitchen table with a glass of water and thought about the way his boy had watched that wall. He sat with it for a long time. He did not arrive at a conclusion. He just sat with it until the water went warm in the glass. The following week, it happened again. This time during a Saturday lunch. Vanessa's phone rang, not just buzzed, but rang, with the volume turned up so the sound filled the kitchen. Carter dropped his spoon. The sound of it hitting the bowl rang out in the sudden quiet. The boy's face went white. Not pale. White. The kind of color that drains from a child's face when something they have been dreading finally arrives. His lower lip trembled once, and then stopped, controlled, as if he had already practiced holding himself very still when that particular sound came. Vanessa answered in the hallway again. Her voice through the wall was soft and hurried. Carter did not move until she came back to the table. Trent looked at his son carefully. "Buddy," he said, keeping his voice level, "what's going on?" Carter shook his head. "Nothing. You look scared." A long pause. Carter stared at his bowl. Outside, a car passed slowly on the wet street. The heat in the kitchen clicked on with a low hum. Carter did not look up. Then, barely above a whisper, "Mom gets mad when he calls." The kitchen felt different then. Something in the air changed in a way that Trent could not have described, but felt immediately. He breathed steadily and kept his hands still on the table. "Who calls?" he asked. Carter hesitated, glanced toward the hallway where Vanessa's voice still moved, low and quick. The boy looked at his father, then at his bowl, then back at his father. He was 7 years old and making a calculation that no 7-year-old should have to make. Then he whispered it like something he had been carrying for a long time. "Her boyfriend." The room went very quiet. Trent stared at his son's face. The boy was not making something up. He was not playing a game or repeating something misunderstood. He was 7 years old, and he was telling the truth, and the truth had been sitting inside him long enough that it had changed the way he sat at the table. Trent did not move. He did not raise his voice. He reached across the table and placed his large hand gently over his son's small ones. "Okay," he said. "Okay, buddy. Thank you for telling me." Carter looked at him with eyes that held something too adult for a child's face. Relief, yes, but under the relief, a fear of what the truth might now cost him. Trent recognized that look. He had worn it himself at that exact age, sitting at a different table in a different house where the truth was always dangerous. He squeezed his son's hands once and let go. Vanessa came back to the table a moment later. She slid into her seat, tucked her phone into the front pocket of her jeans, and smiled at Trent like nothing in the world had happened. "Sorry," she said lightly. "My sister." Trent looked at her. He said nothing. He just watched her the way a man watches weather that is not broken yet, but is already in the air. That night, Trent lay on his side of the bed and stared at the ceiling. Vanessa fell asleep quickly beside him, or she pretended to. Her breathing came slow and even, but twice in the first hour he caught the faint blue glow of her phone screen under the blanket. She held it pressed against the mattress with her fingers over the screen, dimming it, but the light leaked around the edges of her hand. He said nothing. He stared at the ceiling and thought. The word boyfriend moved around inside his head the way a stone moves in a shoe. Small enough that you could technically keep walking. Big enough that you could not stop noticing it. A 7-year-old boy does not invent a word like that. Children describe what they see. They name what they know. He thought about the past 8 months. The overtime he had taken. The weekends away on difficult repair contracts in Toledo and Flint. The nights he had called home to speak to Carter, and sometimes gotten Vanessa instead, her voice a little off, her explanations for where the boy was slightly too quick, as if she had the answer waiting before he had finished the question. He thought about the way she had laughed on those calls sometimes. A sound in the background. A sound that did not belong in a quiet evening at home. He did not sleep. At 6 in the morning, he got up and went through the routine. Coffee. Shower. Downstairs to pack Carter's lunch while Vanessa slept in. This was their arrangement on school days, one of the few things that had stayed consistent. Trent liked the early morning quiet with his son, the short window before the world started pressing. Carter came downstairs in his pajamas, still half asleep, dragging one foot slightly on each step the way he did every morning. Trent made oatmeal while the boy shuffled to his chair. By the time Carter had settled in, the bowl was waiting. "Go up and get dressed first," Trent told him. Carter went back upstairs without complaint. When he came back down in his school clothes, he slid into his seat and reached past his bowl for a napkin, and his collar shifted. Trent saw it immediately. A bruise on the boy's upper arm, high up near the shoulder. Dark purple-blue, the kind of color that sits deep in the tissue. And the shape of it was unmistakable. Even marks. The distinct impression of fingers pressed hard into soft skin. This was not a fall. Not a bump against a door frame or a collision on the playground. Someone's hand had gripped that arm with enough force to leave a mark that had not faded in days. Trent's entire body went rigid. He kept his face still by an act of will that cost him something. He reached over slowly and lifted Carter's collar just enough to see the bruise clearly. Carter froze the instant he felt the touch. "Where did this come from?" Trent asked. His voice came out steady because he made it steady. Carter pulled his arm back gently and would not look at him. "Nobody. Carter." The name came out firm, not loud. There was no anger in it that a child could hear. "Tell me the truth." The boy's jaw worked. His eyes filled slowly with the kind of tears that had been held back for a while. He stared at the table. "Mom got mad," he said finally, "because I told you about the phone." Trent felt the rage move through him, fast and hot, the kind that wants the hands to move before the head can stop them. He breathed through it. One slow breath, then another. "She grabbed your arm?" he said. Carter's chin dropped to his chest. He gave one small nod. "What did she say?" A long silence. The refrigerator hummed. Outside, a neighbor's car started up and pulled away down the street. Carter sat still as something cornered. "She said if I ruin her life," the boy said, his voice barely audible, "she'll send me away." The rage collapsed inward and became something colder and harder, the way fire turns to glass. Trent sat very still. His own father had said almost exactly those words once. "You keep causing trouble, boy, I'll send you somewhere else." Trent had been 6. He had believed it completely for years afterward. He had walked on careful, deliberate feet around his own house, terrified of the wrong word at the wrong moment, carrying the weight of his father's moods like a pack he had never been asked to put down. He knew what those words did to a child. He knew what it felt like to be 7 years old and responsible for an adult's choices. He looked at Carter, who was staring at his oatmeal and waiting for whatever came next. Punishment or comfort or the terrible possibility of being sent away, because those were the options a frightened child understood when the adults around him had spent months making the world unpredictable. "You didn't ruin anything," Trent said quietly. "You didn't do a single thing wrong. I need you to know that." Carter looked up. "Are you mad?" the boy asked. "Not at you." Carter held his gaze for a moment, reading him the way children read adults when they have learned that words can mean the opposite of what they say. Whatever he found in Trent's face, it settled him slightly. His shoulders dropped a fraction. He went back to his oatmeal. Trent sat across from him and felt something change inside himself. Not a decision yet, not in so many words, but a direction. Something that had been uncertain and unsettled crystallizing into something clear. He was not going to confront Vanessa before he knew exactly what he was dealing with. He was not going to move on impulse. He was going to find out the full shape of it first. He was going to gather everything, and then he would act. He left the repair yard 3 hours into his shift 2 days later. Told his supervisor it was a family emergency. It was not a lie. He did not text Vanessa. Did not call ahead. He drove the 40 minutes from the shipping yard back toward Millhaven with his hands steady on the wheel and the radio off. Just the sound of the truck and the road and the flat November sky above the highway. He pulled off the main road 2 blocks from the house and drove the rest of the way slowly. Not sneaking, just careful. A man who had decided to see something clearly before he reacted to it. The black pickup was parked right beside the garage, angled and close, like it had been parked in that spot before and knew where it fit. Newer than anything Trent owned. Polished chrome on the running boards. Clean in a way that said someone paid attention to it. Completely out of place beside their 12-year-old Silverado with a dent in the rear panel. Trent pulled past the driveway and parked on the street 2 houses down. He sat for a moment. Both ground floor curtains on the front of the house were drawn tight. In 8 years of living in that house, Vanessa had never once closed the front curtains during the day. She liked the light. She always said. She liked to see the yard. He got out of the truck quietly and walked around to the side of the house through the neighboring yard, moving along the fence until he reached the side window that looked into the living room. He pressed himself against the siding and looked through the gap at the curtain's edge. The couch he had picked out. The rug Vanessa had chosen at a furniture place in Grand Rapids 2 years ago. The television he had mounted himself on a Sunday afternoon while Carter sat on the floor watching cartoons. Vanessa sat close beside a man Trent had never seen before. Very close, their knees touching. Her hand rested on the man's forearm. She was laughing at something he had said, her head tilting back slightly, the laugh loose and unguarded in a way she had not laughed with Trent in a long time. The man was large, taller than Trent by several inches, even seated. Tattooed arms, dense and dark from wrist to elbow. Shave head. He had the look of someone who had moved through places that left marks on a person, not just on the skin. He sat in Trent's living room with the ease of a man who believed he had every right to be there. Trent felt nothing in that first moment. Not the devastation he might have expected. Not white-hot rage. Just a slow, systematic cataloging. Information. Data. Evidence. He looked around the room. Carter's backpack sat by the front door. School had ended 45 minutes ago. He looked toward the staircase. Carter was there. The boy sat near the top of the stairs, his knees pulled tight to his chest, his back pressed against the wall. He was watching the adults below, not with curiosity, with a braced, motionless stillness of a child who had learned that being invisible was safer than being seen. Then the man pointed upward. "Tell your kid to stop staring at me." The words carried easily through the window. Not shouted, flat and dismissive, the way a person speaks about something that is irritating them. As if Carter's presence in his own home was a minor inconvenience that needed to be managed. Vanessa twisted and looked up. She was on her feet in an instant, moving to the stairs fast, the lightness of a moment before gone completely. Trent heard Carter's voice from the top of the stairs, high and frightened. "Mom, I wasn't." Then crying. Then a sound that Trent recognized without wanting to recognize it. Flat, hard, final. The kind of sound that has no ambiguity about what it is. His child had just been hit. In his own house. By his wife. In front of another man. Because that man had been annoyed at being watched by a child. Trent's jaw tightened until his back teeth ached. He stood against the side of the house with his phone already in his hand. He did not kick the door in. He did not yell. He did not give himself the short, temporary relief of reaction, because he had learned the same lesson twice already. Once watching his father, and once watching men at the yard who let rage make them stupid and loud and easy to dismiss. Rage without documentation was just noise. It got denied and minimized and turned around on the man who felt it. Evidence was different. Evidence was permanent. He opened the camera on his phone and recorded quietly and completely. The black pickup with its license plate. The house. The drawn curtains. The timestamp on the screen. He recorded the sound of Carter crying through the wall because the microphone caught it faintly. Then he put his phone back in his pocket, walked back to the truck, and drove to the end of the street. He parked there and sat for 20 minutes, breathing steadily, not fighting the anger down, but letting it settle into something useful. He thought about Carter at the top of those stairs with his knees pulled to his chest. He thought about the bruise in the shape of fingers. He thought about 7 years old and already learning that the safest thing a person could do was make themselves as small and invisible as possible. He started the truck. He drove past the house without slowing down and kept going toward the public library on Route 9, where he could research things without using the home internet connection that Vanessa had access to. He had a great deal to find out. He intended to find out all of it. That evening, Vanessa cooked his favorite meal. Hot roast with carrots and potatoes, the kind she made with stock and rosemary, the kind that filled the house with a smell that had once felt like home. She had put candles on the table. Actual candles in the holders his mother had given them as a wedding gift, which had sat and used in the cabinet under the window for almost 2 years. Carter sat at his place and did not speak. He moved food around his plate with careful, mechanical movements and kept his eyes down. Vanessa smiled through everything. She refilled Trent's glass without being asked. When she walked behind his chair to get something from the counter, she touched his shoulder lightly, the way she used to touch it in the first year they were married, before the touching had a purpose beyond just touching. She asked about his day, how the yard was, whether the new foreman was working out. Long shift, Trent said. You work too hard. She said it with warmth and tilted her head slightly to the right. The specific angle she used when she wanted him to feel seen and understood. He had cataloged that gesture years ago without naming it. Now he was naming it. He cut his food and ate. He watched Carter from the corner of his eye. The boy ate mechanically, small bites, eyes never leaving his plate. Every time Vanessa's gaze moved across the table to Carter, the boy looked down immediately, a fast and reflexive drop of the head, like a small animal that has learned that eye contact draws attention. Vanessa did not seem to notice, or she had stopped caring what she noticed where her son was concerned. After dinner, she suggested a film. She sat close beside Trent on the couch, closer than she had sat in months, and laughed at scenes that were not funny in a voice that was performing the act of relaxed contentment. Her phone sat face down on the cushion beside her. Twice she reached for it and turned it over to check the screen when she thought his attention was on the television. His attention was never on the television. He waited until she went to the kitchen for water. Then he crossed to the desk in the corner of the room where he kept the paper statements in a drawer. He had started keeping hard copies after a bank error 2 years earlier had cost him 3 weeks of overtime to resolve. He was the kind of man who kept paper records because he did not trust systems he could not hold in his hands. He pulled out the last 4 months of statements and carried them to the lamp. His chest went hollow before he had finished the first page. He went through the figures twice, and a third time. Opened the savings account on his phone, opened a retirement account, opened Carter's college fund. The savings account, which had carried more than $60,000 4 months earlier, now showed a balance of less than $300. Both credit cards were maxed to their limits. Carter's college fund, which they had been building since the week they brought him home from the hospital, showed a balance of $0. Over $94,000 gone in 8 months. He sat very still with the papers in his hands and the lamp burning beside him. He could hear Vanessa moving in the kitchen behind him, the soft sound of a cupboard, water running, the ordinary sounds of a house that was not ordinary anymore. Then she was coming back. She walked into the room in pajamas, glass of water in hand, her face soft and easy. She saw him at the desk. She saw the papers. And for just a moment, something moved across her face, fast and controlled, a flicker of something cold before it was replaced with confusion. What are you doing? Trent turned the laptop toward her. He had pulled up the bank account summary while she was in the kitchen. The numbers were large and clear on the screen. Where's the money? He asked. The confusion held for 2 more seconds. Then her eyes filled. It happened quickly and cleanly, the way it always had, as if the tears existed just behind the surface, ready to arrive on command. Her shoulders dropped. Her lip trembled. She crossed her arms over herself. "I was going to tell you," she said. "What did you spend $94,000 on?" "It's not what you think." That sentence told Trent everything he needed to know about what she thought he thought. "What do I think?" he asked. She shook her head. More tears. She moved toward him slowly. "Trent, please, tell me where the money went." She stopped moving. The tears continued, but something underneath them went very still and began calculating, the way a person's eyes move when they are searching for the exit in an unfamiliar room. "I made some mistakes," she said. "I was trying to fix them before you found out." He waited. She cried for 20 minutes after that. She used words like difficult and temporary, and I was scared. She touched his arm twice. She looked at him with wet eyes and the expression she used when she needed him to choose comfort over clarity. He let her cry. He said nothing further that night. He folded the statements neatly, placed them back in the drawer, and went to bed. He did not sleep. The next morning, Trent drove to the public library before the repair yard opened. He had a partial name from running the black truck's license plate through a public records lookup the day after he had stood outside the side window. It had taken 40 minutes and cost him $12 on a shared terminal. Derek Mays. He sat down at a terminal in the back corner of the library, away from the front windows, and typed the name into the search engine. 43 years old. Prior addresses across 3 Michigan counties and 1 in Ohio. A pattern of moving that did not suggest stability so much as necessity. A LinkedIn profile that had not been updated in 6 years. A Facebook page with the privacy settings loose enough to see the profile picture. The same large man from the living room window. Younger in the photo, but unmistakably the same. The same jaw. The same eyes that looked at the camera with the flat assurance of someone who had never been held accountable for very much. Then the court records. It took 2 separate database searches to build the picture. But it came together. 2 assault charges. 1 conviction, 18 months served, released 4 years ago. A restraining order filed against him by a woman in Summit County, Ohio, now expired. A civil judgment for unpaid work debt from a contractor in Flint. The judgment ignored, the debt still open. Gambling losses substantial enough to appear in a personal bankruptcy filing 2 years back. Multiple payday loan accounts in default listed in the filing's attachments. Trent sat back and looked at the screen for a moment. The man was not just a person Vanessa had made a mistake with. He was the specific kind of wreckage that moved from situation to situation, extracting what there was to extract and moving on when the well ran dry. And Vanessa had opened the door and let him walk directly into the space where their son lived. He printed the records, paid the printing fee in coins from his jacket pocket, folded the pages carefully, and drove to work. That evening, while Vanessa was at the grocery store and Carter was upstairs doing homework, Trent spread the credit card statements across the kitchen table and went through them methodically, cross-referencing charges against dates. Motel charges in 3 different towns within driving distance of Millhaven. Not the same motel twice. Restaurant charges averaging $90 a meal at places that require the kind of drive you only made if you did not want to be seen close to home. Wire transfers to an account he did not recognize. Small amounts that looked unremarkable individually, but that added up to $22,000 across 6 months when he laid them in sequence. ATM cash withdrawals, hundreds at a time, concentrated heavily on the days he had worked double shifts and would not be home until well after dark. And then one that stopped him. A monthly payment drawn from an account Vanessa had opened in her own name at a different bank than the joint accounts, for a vehicle loan registered to Derek Mays. She had been paying for the man's truck. Trent photographed every statement with his phone and sent the images to a new email account he had created at the library that morning, one she knew nothing about. Then Carter came downstairs. The boy was in his pajamas, and he was carrying something in both hands the way children carry things they are afraid of dropping or afraid of being caught with. He moved carefully, watching Trent's face from the doorway before he came all the way into the room. It was an old tablet, one Trent barely remembered owning, handed down to Carter 2 years ago for games and educational videos. He had assumed it stopped working months ago. Carter held it out. "I hid this," he said quietly. "Why did you hide it?" "Because Mom looked for it." Trent took the tablet carefully. He opened it. The battery was at 11%. 11 videos were saved to the local storage. He sat down on the couch, put on his reading glasses, and watched every one of them. The videos were shot from angles a child would find. Doorways. The gap beneath a closed door. The top of the stairs. The camera was low, slightly blurry at the edges, the audio catching everything it faced directly and muffling things at an angle. But each one was clear enough. The first video showed Vanessa in the kitchen speaking on the phone in a low, rapid voice. She was crying, not the soft, assembled tears she used in front of Trent, but something rougher and more desperate. Her body was smaller somehow, hunched slightly over the counter. She kept glancing toward the staircase, even as she talked. The second showed Derek Mace seated at Trent's table, eating a meal Vanessa had cooked, speaking to her in a tone that was flat and dismissive, as if the house were already his and she were simply the person maintaining it for him. The fifth video showed Vanessa grabbing Carter by the arm. The same place. Her grip was fast and hard, and she shook the boy once before she started speaking to him in the tight, pressured voice of someone who needed something and was furious at not having it. Carter's voice on the recording was high and confused. "I just asked when Dad was coming home." Trent paused it. He looked at the frozen frame on the screen. Carter's face blurred slightly from the angle. Mid-cry, arm held in his mother's grip. He made himself watch the rest. The seventh video was the one that cut the deepest and stayed the longest. Vanessa had Carter backed against the kitchen counter. She leaned down to his level, very close to his face. Her voice on this video was different from the others. Quiet. Controlled. She was not shouting. She was choosing every word. "If your father finds out," she said, "we lose everything. Because of you. Not because of what she had been doing for 8 months. Not because of the money she had spent. Not because of the man she had brought into the house. Not because of any choice she had made. Because of a child. Because a 7-year-old boy had the misfortune of seeing what he should never have been made to see, and she had laid that at his feet as if the weight of it was rightfully his to carry." Trent set the tablet down on the cushion beside him and looked at the wall. He sat like that for a long moment. Carter was still standing near the staircase, watching him, his arms at his sides, waiting for whatever came next. "You did the right thing," Trent said. Carter let out a breath that he seemed to have been holding since he came downstairs. "Is Mom going to be in trouble?" the boy asked. Trent looked at his son. He did not offer false reassurance. He did not tell the boy that everything would be fine, because that kind of promise required a certainty that nobody honest could offer yet. "I'm going to take care of it," he said, "and I'm going to take care of you. That part one can promise." Carter walked to the couch and sat down close beside him, close enough that his shoulder pressed against Trent's arm. Neither of them spoke for a while. Outside the living room window, November had deepened into the kind of cold that made the house feel smaller and the rest of the world further away. The furnace ran steadily beneath the floor. Carter sat quietly, not scared for the first time in weeks, and Trent sat beside him and thought about everything he still had to do. Trent called Child Protective Services early the next morning from his truck, parked 3 streets from the house with the engine running for heat. He made his way through the automated system and then spoke to a real person for 19 minutes. He described the bruises, the videos, the pattern of fear he had observed in Carter over the past several weeks. He kept his voice factual and specific. He gave dates. He gave descriptions. He did not express anger, because an angry man on a CPS call gets heard differently than a man giving evidence, and Trent understood the difference. She told him an investigator would be assigned within 72 hours. 2 days later, on a cold Thursday afternoon, a white state vehicle pulled into the driveway, while Trent was in the kitchen and Carter was at the table finishing homework. Denise Calder was small, somewhere around 40, wearing a dark coat and carrying a clipboard. She had the kind of face that gave nothing away in either direction. Not hostile, not warm, not looking to confirm anything. Simply present and paying attention. Trent had been home from a yard for an hour. He let her in. Vanessa was at the kitchen counter when the knock came. Trent watched her face when she opened the door and saw the badge on the lanyard. Something moved through her eyes. Fast. Electric. There and gone so quickly that someone watching less carefully might have missed it entirely. Then she transformed. In the time it took Denise Calder to introduce herself and step across the threshold, Vanessa became a different person. Her voice went soft. Her eyes went wide with worried, gentle confusion. She pulled the edges of her cardigan together with both hands and looked between the investigator and Trent with the expression of someone encountering a misunderstanding they are already working to resolve. "I don't understand," she said gently. "Has something happened?" "We've received a report regarding your son," Denise said, looking between them both without settling on either. "A report." Vanessa shook her head slowly, as if this were something very sad. "Oh my God, I would never hurt my son. Never." She said it with the weight and conviction of a person who had practiced saying it. Trent had heard it twice already, directed at him in private. Each time, she had felt his distance growing. Now she was redirecting it at someone who carried official weight. Carter came down from upstairs when Denise asked to meet him. He stood in the doorway of the living room in his socks, his hands at his sides, looking very carefully at everyone in the room before committing to walking in any further. Vanessa moved toward him immediately. She opened her arms and smiled. Carter took one step back. It was barely more than a shift of his weight to the rear. Small, almost invisible, but it was unmistakable in what it communicated, and Denise Calder was standing in exactly the right position to see it clearly. Trent watched, the investigator noted. Then he took out his phone. He had transferred Carter's videos from the tablet to his own phone early that morning. He opened the first video and held the phone out quietly to Denise. Vanessa saw the gesture. For one moment, the composure cracked at the seam. "Just for a moment. You recorded me?" Her voice came out halfway between shock and fury. Trent looked at his wife without any expression at all. "No," he said. "Our son did." The words landed in the room, and the room went completely still. Vanessa stood with one hand pressed to the center of her chest. The soft expression was entirely gone. Underneath, it was something rigid and searching, the look of a person who has just discovered that the exits have already been blocked. Denise stepped slightly to the side with the phone and watched the first video. Then the second. Trent could not see her face from his angle, but he watched her shoulders and the set of her jaw. Neither moved. That was its own kind of information. When she handed the phone back, she spoke only to establish the next steps in the process. She spent over an hour with Carter in the den with the door half closed. Just the two of them. Trent sat at the kitchen table and listened to the quiet on the other side of the door. Vanessa sat at the far end of the same table with her arms folded across herself, her eyes moving between the closed door and the middle distance. At one point, she looked at Trent. "You have no idea what you've done," she said. Her voice was quiet and very controlled. Trent picked up his coffee, drank from it, sat back down. He said nothing. Denise came out of the den with Carter just behind her. The boy looked calmer than he had in days, something looser in his face, the particular relief of a child who has been told by an adult outside the situation that what he experienced was real and that it mattered. The investigator spoke briefly with Trent in the hallway in a low, official voice. She told him that based on the interview and the documentation she had reviewed, she was recommending a temporary modification to the household arrangement during the active investigation period, which meant Vanessa needed to leave the home until the investigation concluded. Denise delivered this clearly and directly in the living room with both of them present. Vanessa sat very still for 6 full seconds. Then everything broke at once. She was on her feet. Her voice filled the room and pushed against the walls. "You are destroying this family." She pointed at Trent, both hands shaking. "Everything you have done here, you had no right, Mrs. Holloway." Denise's voice was firm and level. "He did this." Vanessa's voice dropped suddenly, cracking in the middle. "He turned my own son against me. Everything I have done for this family." Trent stood up from his chair. He walked past Vanessa without looking at her. He walked to the front door and opened it and held it open and looked back at her with no expression at all. "Get out," he said. She stared at him. "Trent, get out." She went. She grabbed her coat from a hook by the door and her purse from the kitchen counter. She walked through the doorway he was holding without looking at him. He closed the door behind her without a sound. No slam, just the quiet click of the latch finding its place. Carter stood at the bottom of the stairs with his eyes red and his breathing steady. Trent walked to his son and placed his hand gently on the boy's shoulder, light and deliberate over the arm that had been bruised. "You hungry?" he said. Carter nodded. They went to the kitchen together. Vanessa moved into a motel called the Lakeview Inn on the east side of Millhaven, 3 miles from the house. It was the cheaper kind of motel, with a parking lot that collected standing water and a sign at the entrance that buzzed faintly in the dark. The kind of place people stayed in when they had not planned far enough ahead. Derek Mays moved in with her 2 days after she arrived. Trent learned this through Carter's school counselor, who had begun documenting the boy's behavioral patterns 3 weeks earlier as part of the formal CPS investigation process. The counselor had worked with children in the district for over 20 years. In her written report, she described Carter as displaying signs consistent with sustained emotional stress in the home environment. Difficulty concentrating during instruction, an exaggerated startle response to loud or sudden sounds, a recurring pattern of physical flinching when adults moved quickly in close proximity to him. She described it in formal language as consistent with ongoing emotional intimidation and physical abuse. She submitted the report directly to CPS, and a copy went to Trent's attorney. Meanwhile, Vanessa had been busy. She began posting to her social media accounts the same week she moved into the motel. The posts were crafted. They did not look the way things look when someone is genuinely in pain, messy and inconsistent, and full of the specific details that grief produces. These were shaped for an audience. Specific phrases deployed consistently, with a clear purpose behind the selection of each word. Some men use the legal system as a weapon against the women they could not control. False accusations against mothers are more common than the public understands. "I have done nothing but love my family. God sees the truth. Pray for me." Below each post, friends and extended family responded with hearts and prayer hands and words of support. Some of them reached out to Trent directly. His phone buzzed twice in a single afternoon with messages from people who had heard one version of the story and believed it. He did not respond to any of them. The comment section was not evidence. It was noise, and he had spent the last several weeks learning to distinguish very carefully between the two. What was evidence was what the financial investigator found. 3 weeks into the investigation, a fraud examiner contracted by Trent's attorney uncovered a layer of the financial picture that went beyond the joint account withdrawals Trent had already documented. Vanessa had opened 2 separate credit lines using Trent's personal information. On both applications, his signature appeared. He had never signed either document. She had structured transfers through Derek Mays' personal accounts to make the money's path more difficult to trace. She had taken out a second mortgage against the house's equity using a loan officer appointment she had made without telling Trent, signing documents at a branch office 40 miles away. When the investigator reconstructed the full picture, the total was not $94,000. It was closer to $112,000. Trent's attorney was a man named Philip Garrett. Quiet, 50-ish, the kind of man who wore the same 2 suits in alternating rotation and kept his desk completely empty except for whatever he was working on at that moment. He went through the financial evidence without visible reaction of any kind. "The fraud exposure alone is a felony," Garrett told him at their second meeting. "That's entirely separate from the CPS findings and the domestic conduct." "What does that mean practically?" Trent asked. Garrett was quiet for a moment. "It means she has more problems than a divorce attorney can address." Then came a news about Derek. It arrived on a Wednesday morning through a neighbor who had remained in loose contact with Vanessa and was the kind of person who could not hold information for long once it began to feel important. Vanessa had woken up in the motel room to find it empty. Not just Derek gone from the bed. Her car gone from the parking lot. The cash she had been keeping in a bag tucked inside the closet. What remained of the last wire transfer, roughly $4,000 gone. The jewelry she had been wearing since she left the house, a necklace, a bracelet, the engagement ring Trent had saved for 3 months to buy, all of it gone. Derek Mays had reached the end of what she had left to give, and had left before she woke up. No note, no message, no last conversation. He had simply gathered what was easy to carry and moved on without a goodbye, the same way he had moved through every other situation in his documented history. Trent received this information sitting in the break room at the repair yard, eating lunch. He finished his sandwich. He thought for a moment about what it would feel like to wake up in a motel room in a town you had burned your life to escape from and find nothing left. To have made every choice you had made and still end up there, alone, with less than when you started. He thought about Carter's arm, about a 7-year-old at the top of the stairs being told the consequences of someone else's decisions were his fault. He drank the rest of his coffee. He felt nothing for Vanessa. Not satisfaction, not pity, not anger anymore. Just nothing, the way a room feels after everything useful has been removed from it. 3 months passed. In those 3 months, Trent drove Carter to school every morning and packed his lunch every night before bed the way he had done since Carter was in kindergarten. He attended the parent-teacher conference in November, sitting in a small chair across from Carter's teacher, who told him the boy was one of her strongest readers and had recently made a new friend in his reading group. He went to the winter concert in December, where Carter stood in the second row of the chorus in a red tie that he had picked out himself and played the recorder badly and grinned from the stage at Trent in the audience with a specific, unguarded grin of a child who has not thought to worry about being watched. Trent took Carter to the doctor twice. He made soup when the boy had a cough that went on too long. He checked the overnight temperature in Carter's room because the bedroom window had a draft he had been meaning to fix for a year. Life moved forward in the practical, continuous way that life moves when someone keeps their hands on the work. Carter began sleeping through the night without waking. The flinching in the kitchen when a cabinet door closed a little too hard, that diminished slowly and steadily, the way a bruise fades. The same color thinning week by week, the edges softening until it was nearly gone. He was still watchful sometimes, still careful around new adults, still occasionally too still in situations where another child his age would simply move through them without thinking. 7 years of learned caution does not vanish in 3 months. But he laughed more. He asked questions again, the relentless particular questions that children ask when they feel safe enough to be curious about everything. He left things on the floor without anxiety about what that might bring. He picked up the phone one afternoon without thinking and then looked at his own hand holding it with a brief expression of surprise, as if he had just noticed something about himself that had quietly changed. Trent watched all of this. He stored away differently than the other things he had stored this year. Not as evidence of something wrong, as evidence of something worth the effort. The county courthouse in Grand Rapids was a low stone building with dark brown industrial carpeting and fluorescent lights that hummed at a frequency you could feel in the back of your jaw after you had sat under them for an hour. It smelled like paper and old coffee and the specific staleness of a building that processes difficult things all day long. Trent arrived 15 minutes early and sat with Garrett at the plaintiff's table, reviewing the order of the documentation one final time. The courtroom filled slowly. A court officer took a position near the door. The judge's bench sat empty and waiting. Vanessa arrived with her attorney 7 minutes before the scheduled start. Trent did not look at her immediately. He looked at the documents arranged in front of him, at the particular order Garrett had constructed them in, and let his attorney handle the opening formalities without looking up. When he finally did look across the room, what he saw was not the woman he had brought home from the hospital 7 years ago with a newborn son asleep in a car seat between them. She looked smaller than he remembered, not physically, but in some way that came from further inside. Like whatever had been holding her at her full height had been quietly removed. Her clothes were clean and pressed, but somehow off, too formal for a county family court. The kind of effort that signals someone performing a version of themselves they can no longer maintain without effort. Her eyes were red at the edges. Her hands, folded on the table in front of her, shifted position twice in the first 5 minutes without settling. Her attorney was young and competent-looking and visibly aware that the stack of documentation on the other side of the room was going to be a significant problem. He tried anyway, which was his job. He argued emotional distress as a mitigating factor. He argued that the financial decisions had been made under significant psychological strain. He suggested the videos had been captured without context and might be interpreted in multiple ways. He proposed that supervised access and mandated counseling represented a more appropriate resolution than complete separation of parent and child. Then Garrett presented the evidence. He did it calmly and methodically, the way a man does when he has no need to perform. He moved through the materials one at a time, placing each document with the particular care of someone who understands that what he is building will outlast the hour he is building it in. The videos. The financial records reconstructed by the fraud examiner. The CPS investigation findings. The school counselor's formal behavioral report. The fraud documentation showing forged signatures and structure transfers. He laid it out like stones in a line, one after another, each one heavy, each one placed exactly where it needed to be. Vanessa's attorney stopped attempting to refute after the fourth item had been entered. At some point during the proceeding, Vanessa stopped looking at the documents and began looking at Trent. She held the look steadily, the way someone holds a door open, waiting for something on the other side to come through. He did not respond to it. Then she spoke directly across the formal space between the two tables in a voice that had been stripped of everything she had been using it for. "Please," she said, "don't do this." It was the realest thing she had said since the beginning of all of it. Trent looked at her. He kept his voice low and level and exact. "You already did it," he said. She held his gaze for a moment longer. Then she looked at the table in front of her. The judge was efficient and thorough. She reviewed the submitted materials, heard the closing statements from both attorneys, and asked Carter's court-appointed advocate to confirm a child's clearly expressed preferences regarding his living arrangement. Then she ruled, full physical and legal custody of Carter Holloway to Trent Holloway, effective immediately. Supervised visitation rights for Vanessa, conditional on completion of a court-ordered parenting evaluation and full compliance with all ongoing CPS requirements. Equitable division of remaining marital assets, adjusted to account for the documented financial misconduct. Vanessa sat perfectly still through all of it. Her attorney leaned toward her ear and said something brief. She did not react. Then the judge indicated the additional matter. The referral of the financial documentation to the county prosecutor's office for review of potential criminal charges. Vanessa's head came up. Her attorney put a steady hand on her forearm. Trent gathered his documents. He straightened the pages and placed them in the folder Garrett had provided and closed the folder. He stood, buttoned his coat, and nodded once to his attorney. Outside the courthouse, the sky sat flat and white, the particular color of a Michigan winter sky that holds all the light it has without offering any warmth with it. His breath came out in short clouds. The parking lot was half full and quiet. His car was in the first row. Carter was waiting in the back seat, holding a foam cup of hot chocolate with both hands, his aunt sitting beside him. She had driven up from Lansing that morning to stay with the boy while the hearing ran. When Carter saw Trent coming across the parking lot, he pressed his face slightly closer to the glass. Trent got in the driver's side and turned his seat. Carter looked at him with the careful, reading expression he used when something important had happened, and he was not yet sure what it meant. "Is it over?" the boy asked. Trent looked at his son. The bruises were long gone. The fear was smaller now, pushed toward the edges of things rather than sitting at the center of them. It was no longer the first thing in Carter's face when he looked at an adult. "This part," Trent said. "Yeah, this part's over." Carter considered this. He nodded slowly, accepting it the way he accepted most things now, not with anxiety or immediate follow-up questions, but with a quiet, internal settling. He went back to his hot chocolate. 6 months later, the snow came back. It came 2 weeks earlier than Trent had expected it. A steady, persistent snowfall that blanketed the yard and the driveway and settled on the roof of the small lake house in a silence that muffled everything it touched. The world outside the windows went white and very still. Trent drove back to Grand Rapids on a Tuesday morning. There was no plaintiff's table this time. No family court carpeting, no carefully arranged custody documents, no long negotiation over the terms of someone's access to their own child. This was the county criminal court building, a different floor, a different room, a different kind of proceeding. The hearing lasted most of the morning. The charges were specific and carefully documented. Fraud by false pretenses, forgery of financial documents, unauthorized use of a person's credit and identity. The prosecution's financial investigator presented a clear, methodical timeline of how the accounts had been manipulated, how the forged signatures had appeared on the credit applications, how the transfers had been structured in amounts and intervals designed to avoid triggering automatic monitoring flags. He spoke for nearly an hour, and every minute of it was supported by documentation. The prosecutor was measured and precise. She laid out each individual charge with its corresponding evidence and moved to the next without drama or embellishment. The case did not need embellishment. Vanessa sat at the defense table in a dark blazer with her hands in her lap. A court-appointed attorney sat beside her. She looked at the table in front of her more than she looked at anything else. The social media posts were long gone, deleted in the weeks following the divorce ruling, as if removing them from a screen could remove them from the record of what had been. They had been preserved, of course. Screenshots, web archives, documented timestamps. The prosecutor referenced them briefly as evidence of the defendant's public posture during the period under investigation, then moved on. The judge reviewed the pre-sentencing report in silence, then asked the prosecutor a clarifying question about the forged signature exhibits. He received a concise answer. He made a note. He asked no further questions. Vanessa's attorney delivered the mitigation argument with as much force as the facts allowed. Difficult personal circumstances, documented mental health challenges, the breakdown of a long marriage. He asked the court to consider community service and supervised probation in recognition of the defendant's status as a parent and the potential impact of incarceration on the child involved. The prosecutor noted, in response, that the volume and duration of the financial crimes did not suggest impulsive behavior born of crisis. They indicated sustained and deliberate intent, maintained over more than 8 months, during which the defendant's husband worked extended shifts to support a household she was systematically undermining. She noted that the child in question had already been subjected to documented abuse during the period of that misconduct, and that the child's welfare had been actively compromised throughout. The judge did not take long. 14 months in the county correctional facility. Restitution to be determined through a separate civil judgment. Supervised probation upon release. The sentence was read clearly, without hesitation, in the flat official language of a man who reads sentences for a living. 2 deputies moved from their positions near the wall toward the defense table. Vanessa stood. She looked across the courtroom. She was crying. Not the constructed tears from the year before. Not the carefully assembled expression of injured innocence. Something genuinely broken open. The kind of crying that comes when a person has run completely out of ways to manage what is happening to them, and there is nothing left to do but let it come. She said Trent's name once. He did not look at her, not from a desire to wound her, not because he wanted the final moment to belong to him. He simply had nothing left to offer in that direction. What she needed now did not exist in anything he could give her. What she had needed had never been something he was responsible for providing. The deputies walked her through the side door, and the door closed behind them, and the room began to clear the way rooms do when the central thing has already happened. Trent stood from his chair. He gathered his coat from the back of it and buttoned it. He nodded once to Garrett, who returned the nod with the same economy. He walked to the courtroom door and through it, and out into the corridor, and then down the stairs and out the front entrance into the cold. He did not look back. Outside, the snow was still falling. Carter stood beside Trent's truck in his heavy winter coat and the dark blue knit hat he had picked out himself at a hardware store last month when they had gone to replace the furnace filter. He was holding a foam cup in both hands. Trent's sister, Claire, stood close beside him. She looked up when Trent came through the courthouse door and read his expression the way sisters read brothers, and asked all of her questions in a single look. He gave her a small nod that answered them. She put her hand briefly on his shoulder. Then she moved to collect her bag from the hood of the truck and say a quiet goodbye to Carter. Carter looked up at Trent. Snow had gathered on the brim of his hat and on the shoulders of his coat. "Is it really over this time?" the boy asked. Trent reached out and placed his hand on top of his son's head. adjusting the hat slightly. His hand stayed there for a moment. "Yeah," he said. "Really over." Carter stood with this for a moment. Not worried, not relieved in any urgent way, just processing it the way he processed things now, with the steady quiet of a child who has learned that being able to think something through is better than rushing to feel it. Then he held up the cup. "Claire got you one too. It's in the cup holder." Trent looked in through the window. A second foam cup in the console. He opened the driver's door. They got in the truck together, Carter swinging into the passenger seat the way he had been doing since he had asked one afternoon 8 months ago if he could ride up front, and Trent had said yes without making much of it, and neither of them had thought much about it since. Trent pulled out of the courthouse parking lot and drove through streets that had gone white and quiet under the falling snow. He merged onto the highway that would take them north, back toward Millhaven, back toward the lake house with the old furnace that rattled when the temperature dropped below 10, and the backyard that needed attention in the spring, and the porch railing Trent had been meaning to replace for 2 winters running. The snow came down steadily against the windshield. The wipers moved in their slow, steady arc. The heater worked with the even, low hum of something that had been running long enough to find its rhythm. They drove in silence for a long time. Not uncomfortable silence. The kind that sits between two people when there is nothing that needs to be said right now, and that is a good thing rather than a bad one. Carter looked out the passenger window at the white fields moving past, the bare tree lines at the edge of each field, the occasional farmhouse with its lights already on in the early afternoon dark. About 20 minutes from home, Carter's phone buzzed on the seat between them. A message from a friend at school. Something about a project that was due on Monday and whether Carter had started it yet. Carter picked the phone up without hesitation. He read the message. He smiled at it the way children smile at the small, manageable inconveniences of normal life. He typed back a quick answer, shaking his head slightly at something the reply said, then put the phone face down on the seat and went back to looking out the window. Trent watched the road. He watched, out of the corner of his eye, the way his son's shoulder sat while he looked at the fields going past. Loose. Easy. Settled. He had not seen Carter pick up a phone without some trace of bracing in his body since before any of this had started. He turned his attention back to the highway and kept driving. The house would be cold when they got back. He would need to check the furnace. There was food in the refrigerator. Carter had pointed out last weekend at the grocery store the ingredients for a stew that Trent's mother used to make in winter. Carter had found a photograph of it in an old family album. A photograph of Trent as a child sitting at a table with the stew in a bowl in front of him, and had asked about it with the specific curiosity of someone who wants to understand where a person came from. They had bought what they needed and had not gotten around to making it yet. Maybe tonight, if Carter still wanted to. The lake would be nearly frozen by now. The house would be quiet in the way it was always supposed to be quiet, without the held breath underneath it, without the listening for footsteps, without the small body at the top of the stairs with its knees drawn up to its chest and its back pressed against the wall. Just the furnace running. Just the snow outside. Just the two of them driving home through a winter that had gone the way winters were supposed to go, cold and persistent, and eventually done. Trent drove. Carter sat beside him. The road stretched north through the white.